Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, we warned about this, and it just happened. Guys, this is quite possibly the dumbest bill ever passed in Congress, and that's saying a lot. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about this right here. This is from NBC News. It says, this is from earlier on Saturday. It says, House to vote on what to do with billions of dollars of frozen Russian government assets. And it says hundreds of billions of dollars worth of frozen Russian government assets are sitting in banks across the United States and Europe. And on Saturday, a vote is expected in the House of Representatives that would pave the way for President Joe Biden to confiscate billions of them and hand it over to Ukraine. Somebody has to pay for reconstruction, said former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, a proponent of using the Russian assets to help Ukraine. And I think it should be Putin, not the American people. If he really believed that, and if he had half a brain, he would know that we don't want this to happen because the American people will pay 1,000 times over for doing this. And unfortunately, guys, they did this later on Saturday. So here we have this article from Yahoo. It says, U.S. House approves bill to transfer seized Russian assets to Ukraine. So keep in mind, this is just, as of this moment, the House of Representatives that's passed this. This isn't law yet, but it's widely expected. The House was expected to be the roadblock. As we talked about this actually back in January in a video titled, Is February 22nd the End of America as We Know It? Because at that time, they were talking about passing this bill into law in time for the 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which would have been February 22nd. I said at that time, if they do this, it is the end of America as we know it. And we'll talk about why in just a moment, but I'll put a link to that video at the top of the comments so you can go back and watch that and get a refresher on what we said back then, because guys, the House was expected to be the roadblock, the Senate is expected to pass this, and Biden has said he will sign it into law. So it's probably only a matter of time before we see this happen, maybe as soon as today. So, was the video title at that time is February 22nd, the end of America as we know it? Well, clearly the answer then was no, at least in regard to that question. Turns out it may be April 22nd instead of February 22nd, or at least sometime close to today. So this goes on. It says the U.S. House of Representatives on April 20th passed a bill that would allow the seizure and transfer of frozen Russian assets held in the U.S. to Ukraine. The bill caters to Republican priorities, including sanctions on Iran and a measure that would lead to a nationwide ban on TikTok. The House also approved a key foreign aid package that includes almost $61 billion to assist Ukraine. The bills will now head to the Senate for a vote before being sent to President Biden for signing. The measure approved by the House will enable the executive branch to seize immobilized Russian assets and use them to help Ukraine's defense and recovery efforts, according to CNN. The majority of the Russian central bank's assets that were frozen by the European Union and Group of Seven are held in the EU. The U.S. holds around $5 billion worth of Russian assets out of the total of $300 billion frozen by Kiev's Western and other allies. While some partners like the U.S. have been pushing to funnel these funds directly to Kiev, European countries have been more hesitant, fearing economic and legal pitfalls, which they should. We'll talk about that in a second. The EU is instead working on a plan to use the profits generated by the frozen assets to fund defense for Ukraine. And then, of course, here we have news articles. Just report the news. If you're claiming to be a news article, we don't need commentary. And a positive step. There's no need to put that in there because this is not a positive step. Unless you want to see the Western financial system destroyed and America and its allies lose ground to their enemies. If that's what you want, then yeah, I guess you could call this a positive step. It says in a positive step on April 16th, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe voted unanimously in support of a resolution calling for seizing frozen Russian assets and using them for a new fund for Ukraine's reconstruction. And guys, this is catastrophically stupid on so many levels. They look at this and go, ha ha ha. Back in January when we were talking about this, Speaker Mike Johnson said that it would be pure poetry. Ha ha ha. We're gonna seize their assets. Here we're talking about collectively, what, 300 billion? The interest on the national debt alone is over $1 trillion a year. So while 300 billion to you and me is a lot of money, to government spending, it's nothing. And yet, that 300 billion is going to cause a cascade we've already been seeing happen for 10 years now, but it's accelerated since the war in Ukraine, of foreign nations dumping U.S. debt in favor of gold. And so we are seeing the United States dollar lose its reserve currency status. We're seeing nations that used to want to hold United States debt, which was called the quote, risk-free asset. Central banks would hold that on their balance sheet. Now, they're looking around and saying, hey, well, if the United States, if we do something that they don't like, it looks like they're just going to freeze our assets. So maybe we don't want to hold those. Let's dump all our treasuries. Let's dump all our debt, U.S. debt. We're not going to buy that anymore. Instead, we'll buy gold, which isn't going to do that to us. If we hold the physical gold, there's no counterparty risk involved. It's in our possession. It has value. This is the way that the world operated for hundreds of years prior to 1971. And guys, that's how it's probably going to operate here in the not too distant future, because the United States is basically, and Europe, are making this stupid decision to throw away reserve currency status. Now, and I say stupid, there are many politicians who just are clueless. They don't understand this at all. There are others, however, that want to do this. And not necessarily because they're trying to destroy America, but because they think that it will be good for America. There's many within the Department of Defense who see the United States dollar being the world's reserve currency as an anchor that's holding down the United States, and that is a threat to national security. And the reason they feel that is because to hold that reserve currency, it implies that you're going to run perpetual trade deficits with other nations, which is what we've been seeing for decades now. And that has led to the offshoring of U.S. manufacturing capability. And the Department of Defense looks around and says, how are we supposed to wage a war against China if all of our munitions are manufactured in China? They're probably going to cut that off if we go to war with them. So it's a national security issue. So they want to see that manufacturing capability reshored to the United States. Certainly that comes with benefits. The problem is, as other nations dump all of this U.S. debt, well, interest rates on that are going to go up. We're already running over $1 trillion in annual interest expense on the national debt. $2 to $3 trillion deficits annually. We're going to be piling on that debt. To do so, if you think we've seen inflation the last 4 years, you haven't seen anything yet compared to what's coming as a result of what they just passed in the House on Saturday. Once this passes the Senate and is signed by the president, not saying this is going to happen overnight, but as these countries will accelerate dumping U.S. debt, we're going to see inflation running wild in the years to come. Now, we may very well have a financial crisis in the meantime that temporarily puts a halt to that before it starts to run away. But guys, the U.S. power and the ability of the U.S. military to project power around the globe, which clearly conventionally they can't do anymore, as evidenced in the Red Sea, that is built upon the U.S. dollar as the dominant currency used in trade. It's based on the U.S. dollar being the world's reserve currency, U.S. treasuries being held as reserve assets by these central banks all around the world. Now they're saying, I'm not so sure I want to hold this anyway because it's, you guys are running really big deficits, spending irresponsibly. I'm not sure that I'm ever going to get my purchasing power back from that. But also, hey, if we do something you don't like, well, you can just freeze our assets and take them. I think we'll do something else instead, and we'll buy gold. And guys, that's exactly what we're seeing. We've been talking about this for a couple of years. This is from just a week or two ago in the Wall Street Journal. It says gold hits new high as central banks ramp up purchases. It says gold closed at another record high Monday, driven by central bank purchases, but prices may run into roadblocks due to wavering interest rate cut expectations. And yes, those rates aren't going to get cut because they're going to run those rates up with this stupid bill. It says central bank buying has been the main driver. China's central bank added gold to its reserves for the 17th month in a row in March. Other nations have also been adding to their gold reserves. Gold tends to become more attractive in times of instability when investors pile into safe haven assets as a hedge against the economic climate, geopolitical tensions, or inflation, or all of the above, right? That's what we're seeing now. We believe this is likely to continue for the rest of the year. And guys, the last time we saw central banks buying at the rate we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years, 2022, 2023 were record years of central bank purchases of gold. You had to go back to the late 1960s to find the last time central banks were buying the amount of gold we see them buying now. Why is that? What happened back in the 1960s? Well, they could see, back then we were on the global monetary system was something called Bretton Woods. It was based on this Bretton Woods agreement from 1944, where the world's industrial powers got together and they determined, well, the United States has all the gold, so we're going to peg the dollar to gold. It will be convertible. Dollars will be convertible into gold by foreign nations. Then the United States sort of took advantage of that and printed more dollars than they had gold. Other nations like France said, hey, we got all these dollars, give us the gold. And Nixon, eventually in 1971, in August 1971, he said, you know what? We're going to temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. And here we are almost 53 years since then. And that temporary stoppage is still in place because the U.S. was spending on, the Great Society programs and the war in Vietnam and simply printing dollars, and they didn't have the gold. They would have gone bankrupt. All the gold would have been gone if he hadn't have done that. And of course, we know that United States spending issues have gotten worse since then. They've just continued to spend and run up the national debt. So other nations are looking at this and they're turning this system, this post-1971 monetary system where all the world's currencies are fiat currencies. That means they're not backed by anything. There's no gold backing them. It's just a government promise. That house of cards, it's about to collapse. It's coming to an end. God willing, we'll do a video very soon explaining a little bit more about that and how that plays into a radical reset of the global economic system and the global monetary system, which will likely have central bank digital currencies as the backbone of that. But guys, this order is coming to an end, and we've seen the BRICS nations break off. We've seen this move toward a bifurcated global system where you have nations that no longer want the dollar. They no longer want U.S. treasuries, U.S. debt, and instead they want gold, and they're stockpiling gold because, again, there's no counterparty risk to gold. Gold isn't going to say, I confiscate myself, right? If you have gold in your possession as a central banker, it doesn't matter if the United States, they can't say we're going to freeze your assets. You have them right there. There's no, you're not dependent on a second party to fulfill its promise. And so we're seeing a move back toward that. That doesn't necessarily mean we'll see a move back to the gold standard. But what I think we're clearly seeing is that U.S. treasuries, that is U.S. debt, is being replaced as the world's reserve asset for central banks by physical gold. And that means inflation of the US dollar. It means the end of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And despite the advocates for that within the Department of Defense, I believe that means the end of US ability to project military power across the globe, especially as we see oil increasingly no longer priced solely in dollars, as we had seen for the last 50 years. So, guys, this is not going to end well. This is really the dumbest thing I could think for the United States to do right now. Again, partially that's because there's stupid people in positions of leadership. Partly that's because some of these people think they're making a good move on behalf of the United States. Because they're wrong. They would probably be right if we didn't have $30 trillion in debt and over $100 trillion in promises for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all these other programs simply cannot be paid back. And what can't be paid back won't be paid back. And so there's some tough times ahead for the United States and their allies. We would expect to see this in the last days because the Bible does not speak of the United States playing any role whatsoever in end times events, which, based on the past several decades of what's world events, that doesn't make any sense. We would expect, well, the United States has been the global superpower. Well, they're no longer going to be the global superpower. They've already taken a step back from that level of power over the last several years, for certain. It's only getting worse. We see event after event after event showing that the United States is losing its superpower status. But again, that's what we would expect to see if we're in the last days and we're nearing that tribulation period, which I believe all the signs that Jesus and the prophets said to look for are present and telling us that's exactly where we are. So, what do you think? Leave your comments below. Let me think. Do you think this is a big deal? I think it is a significant big deal. And unfortunately, a lot of us are going to pay the price for this through higher inflation, which we've already been doing, but it's just going to get worse, guys. So Let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And God willing, I will see you on Wednesday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to visit my Substack at brittgillette.substack.com. There you'll find my latest videos and articles, as well as notes, where I share the latest news headlines, the articles I'm reading, and the videos I'm watching. Subscribe for free, and each new post on Substack will be sent directly to your email. Just scroll to the bottom of the homepage and hit the subscribe button. As an added bonus, your first welcome email will include a link to a copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt Gillette on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.